to go visit his house and his studio, go see the work he was doing, and and just seeing the houses that he was doing. He was doing some things that most people, most houses that were being built at the time, nobody was doing what he was doing. Anyway, so that was a really big inspiration.
Hey, Islanders, and welcome to episode 174 of the Camano Voice. Today, I'm speaking with the owner of Designs Northwest Architects. Please welcome Dan Nelson. Hi, I'm Brandon Ericson, and you're listening to the Camano Voice podcast, where I interview local business owners, comedians, singers, and more. I dive into their backstory to find out how they got where they are, what are some of the tips for you to do the same, and find out where they are going. Tune in every week as I interview more of the people you see every day. Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Camano Voice, where we release a new episode every Tuesday. Hope you guys had a great week. Happy Easter, late Easter. I guess that was earlier this week on Sunday. But yeah, hope you guys had a good Easter. We had a good Easter. We had to hang out with my family, and my mom was able to come and visit. That all went really well. The kids are getting so big now that the older ones hid the eggs for the younger ones, and so that was great. So we didn't have to go out into the rainy, windy weather, which was great, and we just got to watch and enjoy from the safety of the house. But no Easter would be complete without a visit to the emergency room, which ended up being just fine. It was for our youngest, and we thought something was happening. It wasn't, and maybe it was happening. I don't know. Anyways, between the medicines, he was fine. So he's doing well, but just a typical ending to a good day. So. So that was my weekend. Hope you guys had a slightly better weekend than that. Hope you guys enjoyed all the festivities that are around Easter. And so I'm going to stop talking about that now. All right. So today I get to interview Dan Nelson, who is the owner, as I mentioned, the owner of Designs Northwest Architects in Stanwood. It's that beautiful building as you're, kind of right across from Twin City. It stands out. I'll put it that way. And it's got the Casera Gallery below it as well. But I was super excited to interview him because he is one of with my dad, worked on the design of Camano Commons. So obviously the Camano Commons is where I'm located and where my business is. And I'm just I was so excited to be able to interview him just because it has so much meaning to here as the complex and why it was designed the way it was and all of those pieces. So I was really looking forward to it, and it did not disappoint. Great getting to know Dan. He kept telling me, it's like, last time I saw you were yay high, very small, running around. So that was probably the last time we had interactions together, was when my dad was actually building this place. So really fun to see him. Also, another funny connection is that our pastor actually worked as an architect, as an intern for Dan Nelson's office, and then he ended up doing a little bit of architecture work before deciding to become a pastor. So lots of connections to Dan Nelson and Designs Northwest Architects. And so we kind of go off on all sorts of different tangents here. But the other thing that really stood out to me is, and I've said this before in my podcast, I'm always inspired by people who love what they do. And not only that they've enjoyed it and they've enjoyed the field that they're in, but Dan has been the owner of Designs Northwest Architects and working with the company before he owned it for, I think, 31 years now, maybe more, and still loves what he does. He's like, he mentions it in the podcast that he's like, I probably should be looking at retirement, but I love what I do. And he just loves architecture and loves studying it and learning more and just continuing to learn. And so I love when I get to talk with those people because they inspire me that Work doesn't have to be something that we dread or something that we're like, oh, we got to go do this again. But really, it's something that we can really be passionate and enjoy and get a lot of joy out of it, out of the work that we do. So I hope that's an encouragement for you guys out there. But yeah, without further ado, here's my conversation with Dan Nelson. Hey, Islanders, and welcome to another episode of the Camano Voice. Today I'm here with the owner of Designs Northwest Architects. Welcome to the podcast, Dan Nelson.
Yeah. Hi, Brandon. Happy to be here.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So before we get started, tell us a little bit about Dan.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I grew up in Everett, Washington, so
Okay.
I'm fairly local. And as a boy, growing up, we made a lot of trips to Camano Island, so I had a very fond connection to Camano. And as I grew up and graduated from high school, graduated from Everett High School, went on to get a bachelor's degree, liberal arts degree in philosophy, actually, from Pacific Lutheran University. And as I was, I think I was a junior, somewhere between my junior and senior year at PLU, I decided what I really wanted to do was be an architect. I decided to make that leap. And so I finished my senior year and then applied to an architecture school back east called the Boston Architectural Center.
Okay.
And the reason I went there is because it had night classes. So I could actually study architecture at night and work during the day. And so I applied to the BAC and was accepted. And I worked for a year between graduating from PLU and going to architecture school in Boston, and then to save some money to make the trip and pay the first year of tuition. And then so went out to Boston and got a bachelor's of architecture degree from the Boston Architectural College.
Okay.
It's now called the Boston Architectural College. And so I had a Bachelor of Architecture degree from there. Worked, again, it took me 4 years to get that degree, and then I worked in offices during the day.
Okay.
And I did all of my courses at night, all my design courses, all my history and theory and structure, all that stuff I studied at night in the evening. And so I'd work in an office, and then I'd get done with work around 5-ish, and then took the subway into the Back Bay of Boston, where the Boston Architectural Center was located. And I would then spend 2 or 3 hours at the school, taking design studios and theory, history, structures, and then I'd go home, get on the subway, and head home to wherever, Brighton or wherever we were living at the time, and I'd spend another couple hours doing my work, doing my design stuff. So I wouldn't go to bed till like 2 o'clock in the morning, a lot of times, 1 or 2 o'clock, and then I'd get up at 7 and go into an office and work, and then do it again. But I really loved it.
Yeah.
It was like when I went to Boston and started architecture school, it was like I really found what it is that I was meant to do.
Yeah.
It was like a calling. So, so that's a little bit of history there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very cool. So I want to jump back. You mentioned you were visiting Camano as you were growing up.
Yeah.
Did your family have a cabin out here, or what was your connection?
Not a cabin, but my dad was a fisherman, liked to clam and crab and all that. And so we'd make the trip from Everett. He had a boat, and we'd launch down at what would be the old marina. It's not a marina anymore. But I think it's the yacht club now. But yeah, there was actually there was a place to launch a boat. And so that's where we'd launch, and or the state park. So we'd go to the state park. And then in Boy Scouts, we'd camp at state park.
Okay.
So, so that's my connection.
Yeah.
My initial connection to Camano.
Very cool.
Yeah.
And you were a Boy Scout as well then?
I was, yeah.
Okay. Did you complete and
I didn't
get
become
Eagle?
an Eagle Scout.
Okay.
No, an Order of the Arrow. So
Okay. Got it.
that was the extent of my. I didn't become an Eagle, but it was great. It was a great experience.
Nice.
Yeah, for sure.
My friend, I did Boy Scouts growing up, and then I did end up finishing my Eagle Scout, but I had a friend who did Order of the Arrow as well.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we were
yeah.
just talking about how strange that some of the steps along that path were.
Yeah. It was all good experience.
It was fun, though.
Yeah, but I was a competitive swimmer.
Okay.
So from the time I was about 8
Yep.
years old, and so I kind of got to the point where I had to decide between Boy Scouts, continuing on, or swimming.
Yeah.
Working pretty hard at that, and so I chose the path to focus on swimming, and anyway, so that's what took me there.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Very cool. Do you
Yeah.
continue to do a lot of swimming to this day?
Not so much. Yeah, after I got out of high school and went to college, I was actually on the crew team. So I
Okay.
picked up crew rowing when I went to PLU, and that was that was back in the early 70s.
Okay.
So early 70s, mid 70s, made the switch.
Yeah.
And so I was part of the crew team for 3 years at PLU.
Okay. Nice. Very cool.
Yeah.
What was you went and got your degree in philosophy.
Yeah.
What pushed you or led you in that direction in the beginning?
Yeah, well, to philosophy.
Yeah.
I just felt when I graduated from high school that it was important to go to college. And so my brother and I were the first generation in my family
Yeah.
to get a college degree, to go to college. And so I didn't really, when I graduated from high school, I kind of thought, well, what do I want to do? And architecture was a vague idea at the time. And so I thought, I'll go to a really good school, study liberal arts. Philosophy is kind of in that, it's in the liberal arts vein, get a general education, and then figure out what I want to do. And then between my sophomore and junior year at PLU, I decided to take a trip to Europe with a friend of mine, my roommate at PLU, Marv Kwame. And so we decided to take like a 3-month trip. This was again back in like 1973, but it would be 50 years ago. It was like 50 years ago, 1973.
Wow. Very cool.
Marv and I decided to take a semester off from PLU and go to Europe. And so we planned our trip. We got Eurail passes, and it was kind of a combination of Eurail and hitchhiking a bit. Kind of on the hippie trail at the time, through Europe. And so that trip to Europe was a really enlightening experience. And so going to Europe and just seeing the architecture and the culture and just being exposed to so much, again, just the culture that was there really inspired me to kind of think more seriously about architecture again.
Okay.
Another, talk in terms of influences and what kind of led to my path towards architecture was my uncle. So my uncle, my Uncle Franny, lived in Everett as well, and he was really a tremendously creative guy. And he was an amazing artist. He did watercolors, oils, acrylics, carved statue. He was just an amazing artist. And he is also a builder.
Okay.
And so growing up, occasionally, with my dad, we'd go visit one of his job sites, and he would do a lot of his own designing. And so he designed some really interesting, pretty cool, what I would call mid-century modern, back in the 60s. So this would have been in the 60s. And so he would build, and he designed these really cool mid-century modern-ish houses, and we'd go visit his job site. And then he had he had a studio, an art studio in his basement, and it was always so inspiring to me growing up. That was a real pattern. That was a real inspiration for me to go visit his house and his studio, go see the work he was doing. And and just seeing the houses that he was doing. He was doing some things that most houses that were being built at the time, nobody was doing what he was doing. Anyway, so that was a really big inspiration. So that trip to Europe, and then just going back and thinking about my experiences, influences with my uncle. So I got back from that trip and And I announced to everybody, my wife, who at the time was my girlfriend at PLU, I announced to Debbie that, I'm going to be an architect. I'm going to go to architecture school. And it shocked everybody because I had no hint that that's something I was interested in. So at my senior year, I finished PLU, and then again I applied to architecture school back east and got in. And like I said, it was like I found my calling. Yeah, when I did that.
Yeah.
Sure.
Well, and you said it was another 4 years. Was that because you were working and doing school, or was it another, did you basically start completely over on?
No, I didn't start completely over.
Yeah.
I had the liberal arts piece, classes taken care of. But yeah, because I was working during the day and classes at night, you can only do so much.
Right. You were doing a little bit already.
Yeah, I was already doing some. So yeah, that's why. It took a little bit longer.
Yeah.
That 4 years. And then when I finished the Boston Architectural Center, I had a bachelor's degree in architecture. And because I was working during the day and doing my studios and classes and all at night, I really wanted to take a year and just focus on design.
Okay.
And so then Columbia University in New York had a one-year master's degree that focused on building design. And so I applied for that when I graduated from the BAC, Boston Architectural College. I applied to Columbia and got into that studio, the building design studio at Columbia.
Okay.
And so then that took us down to Manhattan, and I spent 3 years in New York.
Okay.
1 year with the design studio, the building design curriculum at Columbia. And so I have a master's in architecture and building design from Columbia University.
Okay.
And so then I worked for an office in New York for a year after that. And then after I worked for a year in New York, and then I got the Boston Architectural College had a traveling scholarship that after a year after or two after graduating from the BAC, they had a traveling scholarship. They had a stipend they would give graduates to go traveling somewhere in the world. So I applied for that, and I was awarded the Ames Traveling Scholarship, is what I think it was called at the time. And so I had proposed to take a trip to Egypt.
Oh, cool.
And study Islamic architecture. And so I worked a year for a big office in New York after graduating from Columbia, and then got this traveling scholarship. And so I had planned to go to Egypt for 3 months. And so my wife and I planned the trip, and I had to do a whole proposal, right, to what I was going to study, what I was going to do. And so then we did it. We went to Egypt, and I did a lot of drawing. And so one thing I do a lot of, and today even, I'd just taken a trip to Italy in October, and while I was there, I did a lot of drawing. So when I travel, I take my pens and my watercolors, and I do a lot of drawing. And so when I went to Egypt for the 3 months, I did a lot of drawing and sketches.
Okay.
So when I came back from that trip, I did a presentation of my work, of my drawing, all that stuff at the Boston Architectural College.
Yeah.
So then, after that trip, I ended up going back to New England. I went back to Salem, Massachusetts, and worked for a small architecture office, 4 or 5 people. The office was called DeMarco Jarrett, and Charlie DeMarco was kind of the guy that was a big influence on me, a real inspiration as well. And they did a lot of what I call New England houses. Salem is north of Boston, near Ipswich, Marblehead, Ipswich, the North Shore of Boston, and it's in that area has a really rich history of what I call shingle-style houses.
Okay.
And so the office I worked for, did a lot of houses like that. So we did a lot of shingle-style houses, and that style. So
Yeah.
right from the very beginning, this was would have been 83, so 40 years ago or so, I started doing houses.
Okay.
Designing houses. And
Yep.
I've been designing houses my entire career. Even, it's like, that's what we do. We design houses. And
Yeah.
I'd say 80% at least of our workload is custom houses.
Okay.
So I worked there for 4 years and had a great experience. And then a big recession hit in the early 90s. It would have been late, like 89, 1990. A big
Okay.
recession hit. And we also, convergent with that, had our daughter Margot, had our
Okay.
first child. And so it was a combination of having a recession and having a baby that led us to move back to this area,
Okay.
back to the Northwest.
Yeah.
And so then, in our thought process, when we were planning to move back, considering where should we move, what should we do? Should we move to Seattle, get a job, in an architecture office in Seattle, or, should we try to do something different? And so I decided that I really wanted to move to someplace more rural.
Yeah.
And again, talking to my uncle, who at the time was obviously still alive, kind of talking about careers and what a good place to move to would be. He said, Dan, if I were your age and I were starting new, if I were starting all over again, I would move to Camano Island. Because, he had fun there, it's like that connection as well. So I thought, wow, well, let's check it out again. So here we are, 20 years after the fact, coming back to Camano, and my wife and I drove around and thought, well, this could work. This would be a good place to move to. It was really undeveloped compared to what it is now. It was pretty rural. So we made the decision to move to Camano, and that's what brought us here. So we moved back from Salem, Massachusetts to Camano Island. We lived with my parents for the first year we moved back, and we built a little house.
Did you design your own house?
I did.
Yep.
I did. I didn't have any money. So it was I had to be pretty cost conscious. So I built a little house, and I've been working on it for 40 years. I'm still working on it. So I'm doing an ADU right now above my garage.
Wow.
And so I'm always working on my house. So I built this little house, and over the years I have added on to it, and I've remodeled and added on, and always seem to be working on something. And sometimes I like to joke that it's falling apart faster than I can finish it, but not really falling apart. It's just I'm always working on it.
Yeah.
I'm always working on it, doing something. And same spot I've been at, since 1990, 91.
Wow. Very cool.
So when we moved here.
But it's a new house every few years.
That's a new house every few years. Yeah, it's always morphing. It is. It's like a work in progress. It's always a work in progress.
Some people move to new houses. You just build the new house.
I just keep going. Yeah, I keep going. Well, I really like the spot. Yeah, where we are on Camano here, and the house. It's kind of cool. It's a different. It's very eclectic.
Yeah.
In terms of my own house, what I do and how it looks and all that stuff. But I enjoy working on it. Believe it or not, people ask me what my hobby is, and it's like, well, working on my house.
Yeah.
You're working on my house, but also art. I do a lot of drawing again, painting, and being creative is a big, part of who I am and what I do. So anyway, we moved to Camano, and at the time there weren't any architects in this area.
Right.
And so when I moved here, when I first came out to scout Camano out from Massachusetts, I met Ken Miley. Ken Miley was a building designer on Camano. And Ken worked by himself, and he had previously worked with a building designer named Perry Holdsworth, and Barry was from the 60s.
Okay.
So there was kind of this lineage, I guess, from the 60s. Perry Holdsworth and Ken Miley was a building designer. And so when when we moved here, I stopped in to see Ken and asked him about the prospects of being an architect here, making a living and being able to survive, as an architect. Because, again, it was pretty rural at the time.
Yeah.
And so Ken was like, wow, he says, I am so busy he was so busy. This was like 1990, 91. In New England, there was a big recession. And so then it's kind of like I went from this region that was like no work at all. And we moved to Camano. I stopped in to see Ken, and he literally unplugged his answering machine at the time because he was getting so many phone calls for projects. So anyway, we created a partnership where, I came in and started working with Ken.
Okay.
And also it was the two of us, Ken and myself, and we worked together for 7 years or so.
Nice.
And then after 7 years, he decided to retire. It was about 7 years or so. He decided to retire, and so I bought him out and changed it. He actually came up with the name Designs Northwest.
Really?
Yeah,
okay.
he did. Yeah, so it was kind of
Nice.
like a holdover from Ken's time as a building designer. So then I took Designs Northwest and added architect to it. Call it an architecture office. And then, as I say, Ken retired, and I bought him out, and that was the beginning of Designs Northwest Architects.
Okay.
And so then that was probably 97, mid-90s, 98, when that happened. And so then we just kept going. So we were working out of a building across the street from Cascade Lumber at the time. It was an old tear-down type building. And it literally got torn down a few years after we started working together.
Okay.
Because they widened Highway 532.
Yeah.
So when they did that, they tore the building down that we were in. And so then we moved over to a house just to the west of Cascade Lumber. And I think there's a hairdresser in there now, or chiropractor, hairdresser. So we moved into there. And that's where we had our second office, was in that house, in that building. And that is where I met your father. That's where I met Jeff.
Okay.
Yeah, Jeff Ericson.
Yes.
That's where your dad. So your dad, this was 25 years ago, moved from Arizona.
Yes.
Right? And he had a reprographics company in Arizona. And at the time, so he moved to Camano Island, right? And he had all these blueprint machines. So he had all these blueprint machines. And I think it was just about the time that the digital, reprographic machines were coming into, starting to get going.
Yes.
And so he had all these blueprint machines. And so he stopped into our office one day, cold call, stops in, and he, introduces himself and says that he's moving up here from Arizona, and he had a bunch of blueprint machines and wanted to know if we wanted to buy one. And so I think Ken and I got to thinking, and what we ended up doing was starting our own reprographics business in Mount Vernon called the Blueprint Company.
Oh, okay.
And so we bought couple, 2 or 3 machines from your dad, from Jeff, and started a reprographics blueprint company business up in Mount Vernon.
Okay.
And so then after a while, my wife, Debbie, and a friend of ours, Jim Jones, took that over.
Okay.
And so that they went on to become the Blueprint Company and do reprographics for 20 years, which they retired from and sold right as the pandemic hit about 3 years ago.
Really?
Yeah. So,
okay.
And they sold that to another reprographics business. So that was kind of a side deal after having met your dad, Jeff, right? And so that was how we got to know each other initially. And then when it comes to Camano Commons, and how I got involved with Camano Commons, so we had known your dad for a while, and we had a booth it might have been the second year. It was like in the very early years of the chili chowder cook-off.
Oh, yes.
Right?
Yep.
Yeah, and so
Chili
it was like 2 or 3 years into that. We had a booth, and everybody's milling around. Your dad comes over, right, to me and says, Dan, he says, I've got a really exciting project that I want to talk to you about. And I go, wow, that sounds cool. Let's talk. And so, I don't know, next week or whatever, comes in and he describes how he was going to buy the property for Camano Commons, where we are now.
Yeah.
and create what he called a third place.
Yes.
The whole concept of the third place.
Yeah.
And that he was roasting coffee beans in his garage. Or, he had wherever you guys had lived.
Yep.
25 years ago. He started as as a side deal to roast coffee beans. So he's roasting coffee beans in his garage or shop or wherever.
The barn,
A barn, yeah, okay. It was the barn. Yeah, it was the barn. And so he's roasting coffee beans in the barn. And he decided he wanted to buy this property. This is how I remember it anyway. And start roasting the beans here, right, locally. But then as part of that, he wanted to have a whole coffee shop and what he called the third place.
Yes, and just so listeners are aware of that, because it's a term that I think has kind of fallen out and people don't use it as much. Do you want to explain kind of what a third place is?
Yeah, sure. I guess it isn't used as much. But yeah, third place is that. It's like Starbucks, I guess, was kind of the original concept behind third place, was a place where folks go to gather to have coffee and just enjoy being with each other. That's not the home. So you have the home, and then we have the sort of the public realm. We have work and the public realm. But then the third place is where you go to hang out with friends and have lunch and have coffee and just sit with your laptop and do your work. But there's people milling around, and so that's the third place.
Yeah.
And so at the time, I guess that was kind of a new term back in the early 90s.
Yeah.
Was the third place. And there was a bookstore called the Third Place Books.
Yes.
I don't know if they're still around.
Yeah, they're still in
Are they
existence.
still? Yeah.
Yep.
And so the whole concept, I think, with Third Place Books was you could go have a coffee, look through the book, go look for books, hang out, and then sit and have a coffee, kind of browse through the books and magazines, and that was a third place.
Yeah.
And your dad wanted to reproduce that concept here on Camano Island.
Yeah.
And so he came to us and said, this is my concept, and we want it to be really cool, and we want to have it to be a community center.
Yeah.
And be a focal point for Camano Island, because we didn't really, have that here. Again, we were early 90s. We were just starting to get more population and grow. And so that was also about the time that Freedom Park. So it was a whole coalition. Anyway, it coalesced around the fact that your dad wanted to do this third place community center. Freedom Park was coming around. So at the time, this whole corner was owned by Cole and Cole. They were a grocery store chain.
Okay.
And so they wanted to sell this property, get rid of it. And a group of community-minded folks got together, went to Cole and Cole, and proposed that they actually gift part of the corner here, Terry's Corner, as a park. And so that's what happened. Cole and Cole actually did gift part of this Terry's Corner to Freedom Park.
Yep.
And then your dad bought this hunk here.
Yep.
And then the Department of Transportation bought a hunk. And then we also did where the Camano Arts Association is now, at the corner. We did that little kiosk building out there. So it all happened about the same time.
Yeah.
So it all kind of coalesced.
We got it.
Yeah, I got it this time. It all coalesced and created this whole Terry's Corner complex pretty much at the same time.
Yeah.
So it all came together, and so that's how we got involved. And so the concept behind the Camano Commons here is kind of I call it an old world concept.
Yeah.
It's like a plaza, right? And so the concept is you have the community plaza where all the social activities take place. And then we have the various buildings, so we located the retail buildings around this commons area, around the plaza.
Yeah.
And so it's an old world concept, that we worked with to create a new contemporary design for contemporary living and all that. And then so we incorporated the coffee roaster building, for your dad's coffee roaster, Camano Coffee Roasters.
Yep.
And then we had the marketplace, and so that's how it all developed.
Yeah.
That's how we got started with it.
That's very cool. And
Yeah.
I think that that piece is so neat because this style, the way this is laid out, the complex is laid out, is just so unusual. You really don't see it much, especially in the U.S.
Right.
When you go to Central America and stuff like that, you'll see it a lot
South
more
America,
common.
Mexico,
Yep.
South America. Yeah, and that's why I say it's an old world concept.
Yeah.
And your dad was like totally on board with it. It might have initially been his idea. I probably sat down and we have the original sketch, I think we did, and it was like he probably had the idea of having a plaza and, the building surrounding the plaza and then the parking on the outside.
Yeah.
Sort of layering
Yeah.
from inside out,
Yeah.
and to create this sense of community.
Yeah.
So that was a combination of your dad and me, and just brainstorming probably. And
Yeah.
it's been a while. It's been
Been a little bit.
yeah, it's been a little 25 years or whatever. So that's how this all got started, and how I met your dad, and how we connected, and
Yeah.
all that good stuff. Yeah.
So when you were looking at, because obviously that's like a base level of like, this is the idea of what we want to look like.
Yeah.
Where did you come up with kind of the theme, the style of the buildings, being metal, most
Sure.
of the buildings being metal and all that speed?
Sure. Yeah, and again, part of that was your dad. He had seen a project in, I think, Alderwood Manor, near the Alderwood Mall. It had corrugated metal and had outdoor spaces with trellises, and it had a real sort of rural feel to it. It was Alderwood Manor, but so it was kind of suburban, but it had kind of a rural feel to it. And he used that as an example of the type of architecture he was thinking. So again, your dad came to us and he said, Dan, I want to do this really cool complex, and I want to use metal and he was ahead of his time,
Yeah.
right? And so, back then, 25 years ago, now, I would say, 80% of the houses we do, we have metal panels and exposed concrete, and the architecture that we're doing now was, Commons. That was one of the first. This was one of the first projects we did with this style of architecture.
That's really cool.
Yeah, and your dad came and said, I want to do exposed board-formed concrete,
Yeah.
which is, modern material, modern expression for concrete. He says, I want to do board-formed concrete, and I want to do buildings with corrugated metal. And he said, there's this project down Alderwood Manor that, that I really like, so we take a trip down, we check it out. And so that was the inspiration. Yeah, so your dad actually got us he was one of the first clients that we had that actually came to us and said, we want to do something pretty cool that's modern.
Yeah.
With modern materials, low maintenance, and all that. So that was how we got going. Yeah, on that.
Nice.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So then, so when we left off on your stuff, you guys were in the house,
right,
commercial building area.
Yeah,
right.
right. So we were in the little house just to the west of Cascade Lumber.
Yeah.
Right, and so then we had the opportunity to move into Stanwood because we needed more room. We were kind of growing and needed to add some people.
Yep.
And so I had the opportunity to move into Stanwood, where Jones and Butler had a law office.
Yeah.
In the old part of Stanwood, right on Highway 532, and Frank Butler was retiring at the time, and so we had the opportunity to move into his old law office. So we went there and renovated that into an architecture office.
Okay.
And we were there for about 3 or 4 years or so, and then we had the opportunity to rebuild a section next to Jones and Butler. There was an old warehouse. Mm-hmm. At the time that Twin City Food stored their cardboard boxes.
Okay.
Right, and so during the summers, they would hire high school and college kids to go, with their forklifts and stack boxes. And over the years, the the columns and the walls got battered. Right, the forklifts. These kids would run into the columns and they'd run into the walls, and after a while, it really weakened the structural integrity of the warehouse.
Yeah.
And so one October during a big windstorm, one of the walls blew out. The building collapsed.
Whoa.
And that was mid-'90s again. And so because of that, we had an opportunity to rebuild. So right now, I think it's North 48 is a real estate office now.
Yep.
So then we renovated. We rebuilt that section of the block. We rebuilt that and created our office there. So we were there for about 10 years, I think.
Okay.
And so in that time, where my office is now, the property was a gas station.
Okay.
I don't know if people remember. Yeah, well, the original gas station building is still there.
Okay.
Right? Yeah. So I had an opportunity about, I don't know, now 12 years ago to buy that property. And so we bought that property, and shortly after that, 2008 hit, big recession. And so that kind of put my goal of building a new building on that lot on hold for a few years. So we had to get through the recession and get back rolling again. And so, 6 years ago, I would say now, 5 or 6 years ago, we built the building we're in now.
Okay.
So that, we built that. Kept the gas station building, which is now a commissary kitchen.
Okay.
And that's where, the barbecue food truck prepares their food. And so that's a commissary kitchen where the old gas station building was.
Yeah.
And then we built our building, which we've been in for 5 years probably.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's kind of a history of moving around. I think that's my fifth and final office. After this, it's not having any. We're not moving again. Designs Northwest is where we are.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
well,
it's
and it's
all
a
good.
beautiful building.
Oh, thank you.
It's very cool.
Yeah, it's been fun. We've gotten a lot of really good feedback from it. It's been a really great place to do our work. It's an open studio space, great light, and great location. So yeah, it's been good. It's been really good.
Nice.
Really enjoy being there.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So another question I wanted to ask, just because I feel like I've had a fascination with Egypt and different pieces of Egyptian history and stuff.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
But I'm really curious, what were the things that really stood out to you in the Egyptian architecture versus the Greek and Italy and Rome and all that? Because they're very different, but they're both from the ancient world, a lot of the styles.
Yeah.
And stuff.
Well, there's, Egypt had several, phases that they went through. The ancient Egyptian architecture, culture before the Romans and Greeks, and so like the pyramids and, the Sphinx, all the old temples, Karnak and all that. So then there was that period that was really, fascinating because there's so much there to see. And so we actually, it was an interesting trip because we, Debbie and I, were part of a small group of folks that was part of a group called Overseas Adventure Travel. I think there were like 12 of us at the time.
Okay.
And so and we were led by an Egyptologist. And so he organized the trip. And part of the trip was we spent, I think, 5 days floating down the Nile on a felucca.
Okay.
The traditional sailboats that sail on the Nile.
Oh, very cool.
So we spent, I think, 5 days floating down the Nile, and we'd stop at temples along the way. So it was really interesting to, get firsthand knowledge from the Egyptologist. Bob Breyer is his name. And he's on YouTube. He does Egyptology discussions on YouTube. Bob Breyer. He's a professor at somewhere in New York, one of the colleges. And so we spent like the first, I'm thinking, 3 or 4 weeks with him. And then the last part of the trip, Debbie and I kind of went on our own. And so what I really was interested in at the time was Islamic architecture.
Okay.
And so, as I was saying, there's the ancient pre-Roman architecture.
Yeah.
And then after that, the Romans and Greeks, actually, the Greeks came with Alexander the Great. Right?
Okay.
And so then the Greeks came, and you started to see Greek temples, and then the Romans came after that. And so there's a lot of Roman and Greek architecture in Egypt as well.
Okay.
And so it's a real interesting mix. It's like real interest, and then Islam, right, in the 600s. Came to Egypt, and that's when you started to get Islamic architecture. And so it's just an amazing, really interesting mix of ancient Egyptian, ancient Roman, Greek, and then Islamic temple, mosques and madras, marketplaces, right? And so again, that old world concept, marketplaces, that you would see all throughout Egypt. It's an amazing place to go. It's just such a layer of history there.
Yeah.
So anyway, I looked at everything.
Yeah.
I looked at like I said, the ancient Egyptian, Roman, Greek, and Islamic work that was going on at the time.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was
Very
really cool. Really fun trip, and real inspirational. Obviously, big influence and all that. So
cool.
Yeah.
Have you been able to ever use that in any of your designs over your career?
Well, I think part of it is just space, designing structure. So when you study mosques, the architecture of the mosque is it's very it's a series of columns.
Okay.
Right? And all of the mosques have they face east, right, towards Mecca. Yep. Right? And so just that sense of space and the sense of the Muslims had developed. The Romans were the first to develop domes, right? Arches and domes.
Okay.
So the Romans were the first culture to develop arches and domes.
Okay.
And then the Muslims picked up on Roman architecture, and they continued the tradition of building with arches and domes.
Okay.
And so then the dome in Islamic architecture represents heaven. It represents the dome of the earth.
Okay.
And so there's a lot of metaphor, right? There's a lot of metaphors in Islamic architecture. Yeah. And so I think, just working with metaphor, working with themes, working with structure and how structure is expressed is part of an inspiration or part of an influence that, if it's subconscious or subliminal or whatever, is there, right? And so again, just even like Camano Commons here, the idea of having that marketplace in the center, and then having the building surrounding, creating that third place, that sense of space, is very, that's what you see when you go to places like Egypt and you look at marketplaces and you look at how cities developed and evolved. Yeah. And so that's what we did here, so these are all things I think about.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Right.
What are you don't have to go into super detail, but what are some of your high level favorite projects that you've gotten to work on?
I thought about that. Every project I work on is special, right? And so every client, every project I really value. And it's special to me. It's like having kids, right? It's like, every project is like you focus on, and it's really special. Yeah. I thought about that, and I would say, I do a lot of projects, right, that have pretty extreme environmental challenges. Yeah. We do a lot of projects, as you are aware. We do a lot of high bluff houses. We do a lot of houses on slopes, unstable slopes. Waterfront, we do floodplain houses. We do houses in tsunami zones over like in eastern Washington with fire hazards. We're just so. What I've found is that the houses that have these extreme environmental challenges lead to creative solutions for those challenges.
Yeah.
Because we have this problem to solve. This
Yeah.
problem of how do you design a house or a structure in an area that is difficult to design in,
Yeah.
right? And so then that tends to lead to solutions that can be unusual.
Yeah.
So it's like we did a house called the Tsunami House. If you see my website, go to my website. I did a house called the Tsunami House, and that was a result of designing a house that was in a high velocity flood zone. And so we had to design that house so that we had breakaway walls. The house had to be designed on piers. There was a whole set of criteria that FEMA, Army Corps of Engineers, FEMA required. And so that led to a solution of building the house on concrete columns with walls, aluminum walls, and we bolted the aluminum frames with plastic screws so that when a wave, high velocity wave hit the lower level, the walls would break away. And so that was a solution, right?
Yeah.
Put this house on concrete columns and have these lightweight aluminum frames that can break away. So it led to a pretty interesting house.
Yeah.
Another house we did was called the Saratoga Hill House, and that was on south end of Camano. And it was at the base of a steep slope that had a history of sloughing away. That you would have mudslides on that beach where that house was built. It was prone for mudslides. And so when the clients came to us and we talked to the county about designing a house there, initially we were told they didn't think we could do that because of the mudslides.
Yep.
And so we couldn't do retaining walls to block the mud because you can't let mud slough off to your neighbors.
Yep.
And so we had just finished the Tsunami House where the water came underneath, broke the frames away. And so I thought, well, if we can do it with water, maybe we could do it with mud, right? And so then we went to the county and proposed that we design a house on steel frame high enough so that if there is a mudslide, the mud would flow underneath the house.
Yeah.
So that led to that solution, right? And so we designed a house that sits up high on a steel frame on really good foundation system, tight foundation system on a steel frame, and then we built the house on top of that. And so that led to that solution.
Yeah.
So those are the projects that, that they're challenging and they lead to really interesting, design solutions.
Yeah.
So they come out pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and you guys you get the extra challenge of not just designing a solution, but also making it look nice in the process. Because you can always, not always, but usually you can design a solution.
Sure.
But I worked in mechanical engineering for a few years.
Right, that's right. Yeah,
when we did
right,
stress analysis stuff, we were working on the tooling side. So aesthetics, it didn't have to be aesthetic, it just had to be functional.
Right, yeah, straight line.
Yeah,
so engineers are like straight line. It's like, let's solve the problem, get on to the next one. Yeah, no, I know. We work with engineers, so we know how that is. Yeah.
Well, the joke on the civil engineering side was that architects designed the house and then they handed it to the civil engineers to figure out how to make it work.
Yeah, that's a joke.
I know.
But we try to think about how it's going to work. Right.
Of course.
So it's solving a problem, solving a solution, and then, how do you do it elegantly?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And create space.
Yeah.
Create space that solves the problem of how people are going to live.
Yeah.
On that piece of property. Looking out to views and how the house flows. So you got to solve, right, all those issues of livability as well as the environmental challenge and the engineering part of it.
Right.
So we work very closely, with our engineers to come up with creative solutions.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, I think it's really cool.
Yeah, it's fun. Yeah, it's great. I still really love it. It's like I've been doing architecture for whatever,
Few
50,
years.
Yeah, 40 years. And I still love it. I still love design. I still love the creative process. And,
That's
it's
awesome.
all good. Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So with that, what do you see as the future of Designs Northwest?
Well, that's a good question. because I'm starting to think about transitioning. Believe it or not, I'm actually going to be 70 in a couple weeks here. So
Happy early birthday.
Yeah, well, thanks. Yeah. So, it's that time for me to kind of be thinking, about transitions. And I'm not planning on retiring soon. Again, I love what I do. I love designing. But, I have 13 people that work with me there
Wow, okay.
at Designs Northwest. And so
Nice.
we have a great group of people. I have three people that have been working with me for 20 years.
Okay.
And so,
That's awesome.
yeah, so then as I think about the future and transitioning, incorporating them, employees into the business more as part of the plan.
Yeah.
And then just, preparing for growth. As you know, our region continues to grow, and the project types are starting to see more multifamily type projects, mixed use type projects.
Yeah.
Again, I've been doing residential custom houses for 40 years, and so I still see us doing that. We love doing houses. That's kind of our primary thing. But we're also starting to branch out into some more community type things. We're working with a firm that specializes in library design from Minneapolis, actually, to design. We're helping them with the remodels of several libraries for Snow Isle. Library system. Yeah, so we're starting to work on some of those. We were working on a mixed-use project here in Stanwood that we're in the process of designing. A variety of things that, I think are pretty interesting. And then we'll keep the Designs North going, I think, for quite a while.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, very cool.
Yeah.
Well, I like to end every podcast with some rapid-fire questions.
Yeah, sure.
So the first one is, what purchase of $100 or less have you enjoyed the most in the last 3 months?
Yeah, so here's it's not something I've purchased. To be honest, I'm going to be honest here. I didn't purchase it. It was actually a gift from my office at Christmas time. The office gave me a digital frame. Right, and so it was the first time I'd seen, not seen a digital frame, but had a digital frame. And so I was a little skeptical at first, but what I found is, because I love to take pictures, right?
Yeah.
So I draw, I paint, creative, but then also when I travel and just family stuff, I like to take pictures with my iPhone and edit them a little bit. And then what I found is I've really enjoyed posting my pictures onto my digital frame.
Nice.
And I have it in my kitchen.
Yeah.
And so it's like I said, several months ago, we took a trip to Italy, and I took a lot of pictures of Italy, and I was able to post them on my digital frame.
Yeah.
And I've just really enjoyed going back and looking at that
awesome.
trip. So it's been good. Yeah.
Very cool.
Right. Yeah.
Who is the most influential person outside of your family in your life?
Well, I talked about my uncle, who is in my family, obviously. He was the biggest influence.
Yeah.
And then, Charlie DeMarco was the first architect, really, that I worked for in Salem, Massachusetts. And, he had a little 4-person office along with his partner, Ron Jarek. And that's where Dave Pelletier is an architect here in Salem. Actually, that's where I met Dave, was in Salem. He was from Salem. And so we actually worked together.
Okay.
Yeah, we worked together for a few years in Salem. And then he went to architecture school in Oregon. And then after that, we actually worked together here on Camano for a few years. So all that being said, Charlie DeMarco was the design lead for his office, and he was a big influence on me for how to design, what to think about, how to kind of run an office. So it's Charlie DeMarco.
Very cool.
A big influence.
All right, this is a fill-in-the-blank question.
Yeah.
I know this is weird, but I've always wanted to blank.
Well, I thought about that, and I've always wanted to be creative. It's like, it's just so innate, right?
Yeah.
To be a creative person, and it's like a drive. It's like a drive. It's like I can't stop doing something or thinking about something that's creative.
Yeah.
And I love being in creative spaces, studios, architecture offices and art studios and just that whole sort of realm, that sort of aura of being creative, being in a creative space. And yeah, that's what I've always wanted to do. So
Yeah.
it's like I always tell folks that I feel like I am one of the luckiest men on the planet, because it's like when I think back to when I was young and my like 30 years old, it's like, what would my dream be? And my dream would be to work in a place like Camano Island, Stanwood, Camano Island, and have my own architecture office and really work with great clients and do beautiful work. And somehow it all came true, right? And so it's, so that's my story there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's awesome. And
Yeah.
it was very impressive when I was going back and looking at your work history and, as I was researching for the podcast.
Sure,
And just
yeah.
that you have been with, I mean, obviously you own Design Northwest, but just you haven't changed. It's just been with that for so long. And
Yeah, right.
especially-
Yeah, it's unusual,
Yeah.
I think. Yeah, to be doing something for so long.
Yeah.
Right? But it went so fast.
Yeah.
It's like, it just seems like, not that long ago when
Yeah.
we first got started. I was working with Ken and started doing houses and still doing houses and working with great people. That's the main thing. It's like, I don't know how many houses and hundreds of projects, right, on
Yeah.
Camano, and we've just had so many great people to work with, and
Yeah.
I've had such a great office, right? The folks that work with me,
Yeah.
we just make such a great group, such a great team, and it's just a very creative place. It's very collaborative. Everybody we sit in an open studio space.
Yeah.
Everybody's working together. Everybody's talking about projects and details and how to solve problems,
Yeah.
how to go to the county, And so we have a very collaborative, open workspace. And just being in that atmosphere every day is inspiring. It's inspiring to me. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's good. Yeah,
That's
it's
so cool.
Yeah.
All right. Who's an interesting or fascinating person that I should interview next?
I thought about that. Carrie Richardson? Do you know Carrie Richardson?
I don't know if I do.
Well, Carrie Richardson lives on Camano, but she and her family owned the Home Center building
Okay.
in Stanwood, and she and her family are the major donors for the new art center
Okay.
that's going to be built.
Yeah.
And so she and her family donated the Home Center building.
Yeah.
And so, as well as some funding there, some significant funding for
Yeah.
the new art center. And she has a long history. So she would come out from Indiana, I think, when she was a girl, when she was young, to visit her grandparents
Okay.
here in Stanwood, Camano Stanwood, and they owned the Home Center building, which at the time I think might have been a hardware store at the time.
Okay.
And so she has a lot of fond memories of Stanwood, and she's been really involved with, and I've worked with her for like 25 years,
Okay.
doing projects in West Stanwood,
Yeah.
where the Japanese restaurant is, Shima.
Yes. Oh, I love Shima.
Yeah, so we did those buildings with Carrie 25 years ago or so. I don't know, a long time.
Yep.
And so then Carrie has a really great history, of the area, really interested in the arts and, the new art center coming along. So, I thought maybe if she's up for it,
Yeah. For sure.
she'd be a great person to interview.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right. And lastly, what piece of advice would you give your 20-year-old self?
Yeah, I thought about that. When I was 20, I was pretty introverted. And, I think, the thing that I would tell myself, and I tell myself even now, is to be open. Be open, be willing to listen, to be bold. Don't be afraid to take chances. That's one of the biggest, I think, roadblocks to a lot of people is
Yeah.
that sort of fear of jumping into something new, taking chances. Because without doing that, you don't develop, you don't grow. And so to my 20-year-old self would be keep taking chances. Keep being bold and be open and listen. And yeah, that's what I would do. That's what I try to do even now. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast
sure.
today.
Yeah, this has been great. I've really enjoyed the discussion. I think I did most of the talking.
I
which
learned
suppose.
so much. I mean, I always take notes throughout
yeah.
the podcast, but my whole pages, I was like, do I have to flip it over?
Oh, good. Well, all right. This has been a lot of fun, and
Yes.
I've enjoyed the invitation.
Yes.
And the discussion.
Yes.
All
Thank you
right,
so much.
Brandon. Take care.
All right.
Yeah,
And
okay.
Islanders, I will talk to you on the next one. Well, a big thank you to Dan Nelson for joining me on the podcast today, and thank you for listening. If you haven't already, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast platform. It really helps us be found by other Islanders like yourself. And don't forget to tell your friends and family about the greatest little podcast focused on Camano Island in the Northwest. And I will talk to you guys on the next one.